All right, you can get started now.
All right, so we are here talking about the Nicollet redevelopment project. I'm Kelsey Folk, I've got Rebecca with me, for those being on the recording. The overall outlook of the plan or the project is that the city now owns the former Kmart site, which is shown in blue there. It's bordered by Blaisdell, Lake Street, First Avenue, and Midtown Greenway. The plan is to reconnect Nicollet Avenue through the site, so to connect Nicollet Avenue from Lake Street to Cecil Newman through that site. It's been a community and a city priority for years to do that, and so we're excited to be able to be at the stage where we're working towards that today, and develop the rest of the site as a mixed-use, high-density, walkable district. Got a few project goals that are guiding our work. We developed these through an earlier round of engagement that happened in August 22 through January of 2023. The key ones are to reconnect people in places, build for who's here today, to create a place where people can live, work, shop, and play here, to build safe, equitable, and sustainable transportation networks through the project, and design for safe and healthy communities. There's a number of sub-bullets under each of these. I'll just call out for build safe, equitable, and sustainable transportation networks. A few key things that we've been working on is pedestrian and bicycle safety and connectivity, and then also transit speed and reliability. So you'll see those things come up later as we talk through our different recommendations. A quick look at our schedule. So that phase one on the left is where we started defining those project goals through engagement with the community. In phase two, that's where we are now, which has been throughout the majority of 2023 and into 2024 here, where we've been talking about the new Nicollet concept layout plans, that's that street layout, and then also the public space framework, which identifies where potential public spaces could go on the site. We've had several different parts of each of these phases. This one had three parts where we talked about uses and priorities for those two bodies of work, and then we brought out a couple of design options for each, got more feedback on those, and then we're back now with our concept recommendations to share with the group. After this, we move into phase three, which Rebecca will be leading on, that will focus on the development sites. And in the background, we'll be doing some detailed street design and engineering to actually get the street ready to start construction. And then we hope to start construction on the streets and the bridge over the Midtown Greenway in 2025. This is a look at some of the engagement that we heard in our first kind of uses and priorities part of our phase two of engagement. We heard from a little over 3,000 people through an online survey that we pushed out. We had, of those online survey respondents, about a third of them were living in the neighborhood that identified living in Whittier, Lyndale, Phillips West, or Central. So the four neighborhoods kind of surrounding the site have been really our focus area. We had 16 different in-person and virtual events, and then talked to almost 700 people at those. You can see from the images, we did some surveys at transit stops near the site to get folks' opinion. We were out at East Lake Open Streets there on the right. And the second part of this phase two of engagement was where we brought out different concept design options. We had similar kind of levels of feedback, maybe a little bit more interest as we moved out with some ideas and had people react to those. Nearly 4,000 responses on our survey. About a fifth of those coming from the four surrounding neighborhoods, a little bit fewer people coming from the neighborhoods, but interest, I would say, wider overall. And then we had 18 different in-person and virtual events. You can see the photo on the left as we had an actual event on the site itself. So we were able to roll out some things on the pavement and show what the street would look like. We did some things around the public space framework. It was a really great day to bring in a lot of different people, have food and music and all kinds of fun things as well. And then on the right was a slow roll event that we did. I know that some in the crowd did that too. So it was a good day to ride around the neighborhood and hear some history about some of the developments and different things going on. And I think Rebecca, if you want to take the
So this is two bar graphs showing priorities for public space. This is from the survey. It doesn't say, but it's telling. I'm thinking this is survey results. It also doesn't say, but I'm guessing this is phase two. So the second survey, not the first survey, but the second survey. You could select more than one. So this doesn't show you like one person, one vote. This shows you one survey responder with, I think, the top 3 for each. But when it comes to park space or public space, the flexible kind of space where you could maybe have a market, or you could have someone host a little birthday party, or you could have someone do a reading, or you could have, you know, a neighborhood event where people bring in, you know, wares to sell, that kind of thing. But space that is very flexible and can adapt to a lot of different uses came up as the top. And then community gathering space, and the way we sort of showed that in images and talked about that more, is more of like greenish space where you'd have picnic tables where people can kind of gather, but not necessarily like a hardscape where you would want to have food and market stalls and that kind of stuff. So various types of gardens definitely were another, probably the third thing there. But playgrounds sort of were lower on the priority list. I think a lot of folks are thinking of this space as something that's more a larger range of ages, not just for families with young kids, but a space that can be widely used across ages. And then the other piece here in the second is the green components of it rather than the uses that you see more. And so trees just really leaps ahead. As we all know, this is a part of Minneapolis where we're really don't really have much for a tree canopy. So that obviously comes up at the top. And then other types of open green space and pollinator gardens.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
In the survey, you mentioned showing images of it, or was, so.
Actually, I
This
don't.
is from part 1, so I think it was just these words. that
Ooh,
wrote the
it was
actual-
just words.
Well, they might have had images that represent.
Not, well, we
right?
didn't have images in the survey. We had images every time we had, so like at all those in-person events, we had these big boards with images, and then people would put like a sticker.
Okay.
And so, yeah,
Yeah, my question was, did the city provide these words, or these were the words that people?
no, those were words that
Okay.
you had to pick from. Yes, good question. Yep. I mean, other would be if you didn't, you know, then you would fill in the blank. And so that would have been all the other things that didn't fit into a different category. Public space themes. So again, this is 9 various themes that the consultant team helped pull out of all of the data from the first round of engagement. You know, we hear a lot about safety, obviously, and that's going to be an important piece for how we design both the park space and the public space, and then the transition between public and private space on site. Trying to plan for flexibility, having space to gather. So lots of different things that are coming out of the activities that we did. And these are the 3 concepts that we then took the information that we heard in that first phase with those 2 bar graphs, and we presented these 3 concepts, and this is the second part. So this is also was the big open house. So when people came, we had about 500 people that came to the site for that. And that's when we had these on big boards, and then you could vote for which concept you liked the most. In the survey version, you could give it stars. So we had like 5 stars, and you could either vote concept A as 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and each of them. So you could vote all 3 as all 5 stars, or all of them as 1. But obviously concept A is like a linear park, both on the east and west side of Nicollet, facing the Greenway, and then concept B is just linear park on the east side of, or excuse me, west side of the new Nicollet, and then concept C has a large, more typical size Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board park on the east, and then what would end up being privately owned park space on the left, which would be a promenade type environment between buildings. And with ped and bike access. I don't know.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Why the angle, or why that angle specifically there? Was there reasoning for it, or was it, this is just my architect?
Yeah, well, so when we come out with the recommendations a little bit later you'll see how we have an alternative as well. I mean, the idea is that we're trying to make a connection between where the new ramp that's Kelsey will talk about is coming up. So right now the ramp comes up at Nicollet from the Greenway and it's gonna get moved for various reasons that Kelsey will describe up to first. So we're trying to make this connection from where you come up off the Greenway over to Blaisdell and Lake,
Yep.
which without having to like, either go up here to stay on off, if you wanted to stay on off-road trails, or not off-road, what do we call them, protected bikeways, you have to go up here and then over to the Blaisdell, versus if you can come here and make your way just a little bit more direct if you're traveling south.
Thanks for explaining that, appreciate it.
Yeah.
I think there's a thought too, that draw people off of Lake up into there too, and create kind of an interesting kind of channel.
And then, so then these are where people did the stars in the survey. And a lot of them came very, very similar. So the surveys on the top, and then from the events, you are from the results from the in-person events on the bottom. In the in-person events, we have a lot more local representation. Obviously, when it comes to the survey, as Kelsey was noting, a lot of people take that survey, whether they live like on the outside skirts of Minneapolis or in the suburbs. Whereas in our in-person events, we're getting most people from a pretty close proximity to the actual location. So we tend to look at those with a different light than we would the survey results. So these are sort of the big public space strategies overall. I don't think I need to take too much time. It's really trying to show the movement, and then the green for where we really want to see. And then even shade trees, you'll see in that bottom left, the ability to be able to add more street trees just in the areas where you would typically see, the tree grade in the street, or on, in the right of way area between the street and the sidewalk. And so being able to really try to provide a lot more shade trees and trees in general on the site wherever possible. So this is where it shows the diagonal as the sort of like, this would be great. And then it shows this other option where, maybe it's gonna need to be 2 boxes.
I like the diagonal.
Yeah, I mean, we like the diagonal. We think it's a lot more interesting and provides for something that essentially challenges developers and architects to do something a little different, rather than, using sort of the same approach that they do to most redevelopment in this part of Minneapolis. And so, but we also recognize that we want to severely limit, but not necessarily say to 0 curb cuts for access off of Nicollet. And we also want to really limit, not necessarily 0, but limit as much as possible curb cuts off Lake Street for safety reasons primarily, but it also really creates a more disjointed,
Yeah, what is the definition of curb cut? Like,
oh, where a vehicle can, yes. A curb cut is where a vehicle can actually turn in. And instead of like jumping the curb, it would be an actual like driveway. It would look like a driveway. Or an alleyway. Alleyways have curb cuts like the one right here off 26. And so we want to try to get most of our truck traffic that needs to go into apartment buildings and businesses off of First and Blaisdell, but we recognize that, like on the left, you're not going to be able to get to this parcel for like picking up garbage or, moving trucks for people moving in and out. You're not going to be able to get to that without accessing it from either the promenade, which is not ideal, but maybe it could work, or Nicollet or Lake Street. So,
Or it could go underground connection from the north, if you were to have a joint development of some sort.
yeah, if you're gonna have your traffic, if you're gonna have your garbage and whatnot, all of that underground, that could be
This is-
combined.
Yeah.
Yes, it is feasible, yes.
Have you guys looked
So-
at dispersed park space? Because that was brought up with Tom Fisher's kind of search for shelter presentation. I'm curious. I see that up there as like number 5, possible locations for additional small green.
So if you
spaces.
go back one, oh, yeah, you can see,
The one more.
No. Maybe it's just not on this one. Did we take off those little green blobs? I mean, we're totally considering it. We just don't know exactly where it's gonna land. And as soon as we start putting it on a map, people start thinking, oh, now it's gonna be there. And what if it's half a block away? Or what if it, and so we do talk about maybe just think more about where you see all the green trees. Think more about how we're trying to create
Mhm.
green space and smaller gathering space, but a lot of that's going to be dependent on how developers solve that problem, trying to create more space on what ends up being developed.
Yeah, I think the reason that was like suggested, which makes total sense, is providing equitable access to everybody within the building developments in general, access to green spaces, so you don't have to walk like a block to get to one. And then you have one outside your door and you have your view.
Right.
Maybe an alley isn't really, that was a suggestion, maybe an alley isn't an alley, maybe that's more of a promenade and a green space that can be
Right.
used and utilized. And I'm just curious if you all have
Mhm.
recommendations on that as part of this plan in general.
We do have a lot of analysis that was done. So 10 by 10 is a landscape architecture firm that was our consultant, and they also subcontract with Formula, which is architecture firm out of St. Paul. And so they did a lot of analysis. So they did like sun and shadowing and wind and noise with 35W and so we had a lot of background analysis, but a lot of it was being used at this juncture to help us make sure that we're picking an option that's got possibilities and isn't really hemming us in, but still gives us a lot of opportunity to try to meet as many of those priorities as we can. But we're also not at a time and a place yet where we can say this, we know this to be, that this is gonna happen exactly like this. So we're kind of trying to leave as much of our options open as we can.
But I guess just the overall question to that is, that makes total sense, is then do you write that as a guideline for potential development in the future for sale of these properties if you're selling them, or if the city continues to own them? Then
Right, so yeah, so there's a couple different options in that, and that's what we'll be doing in phase 3, is really looking at what you can set requirements in an RFP, or you can set priorities where you get points during a review process if you include certain. So you just make some decisions about what is critical and you must have, and you make those requirements. X amount must be affordable at X%, or a minimum of X needs to happen, or we need this many units, but not X, minimum, maximum number of units, and then we'll have our stories based on our zoning code and that kind of stuff. So there'll be some requirements, and then there'll be other things, which is like that we really want, but we can maybe make do with like a menu of things, and then depending on how many you can incorporate, you can get various points during review for those other maybe more malleable type priorities that we wouldn't have to see, but would like to see.
for sure. So is it still in the works then? Is it gonna be sold off, or the city owns?
So in phase 3, so we're just wrapping up a contract now for phase 3. And what that will do is, so right now you see essentially 3 big boxes. We aren't gonna have 3 parcels because those are massive. So we'll be working with consultants to try and come up with, is it 6, is it 5, is it 7, is it like, what number? And then essentially, how do we want to split them up in such a fashion where we can try to think through, like, where would the trucks come in and where would the parking go if it's going to be shared, and sort of where do we want to focus our commercial and how big do we want to focus our commercial, and a lot of that stuff. And then we'll also then build in a phasing plan. We're not going to try to sell all 5 parcels or all 7 parcels on the same day, because that's not going to work. So we'll also just make some decisions about which parcels should we RFP first. And so the city has, experience doing 2 different ways, where one, and I'm sure if you go even further back, you can come up with other examples, but like more recently, since I've been with the city, like we either RFP to a big massive developer and you give one entity all of the square foot, all of the acreage. And we've been moving forward since the very beginning that that's not how we see proceeding here. At our Upper Harbor Terminal, we did that approach where we did one huge, massive, and United Properties won it, but there, everything's leased. So the city owns the title and will in perpetuity, but then United Properties is paying a lease on the land rather than paying for sale price for the land. So we can, this project, we've really been coming at it without a master developer and trying to provide more opportunity for wealth building in communities where maybe some of the parcels we could sell to developers work for their second, third, or fourth small project, or, you know, where they're able to sort of build their portfolio. They have some experience doing smaller projects, and this is like the next step to doing something bigger. We could also consider bundling a couple and, you know, and leasing the land to nonprofit affordable housing developers. Or, I mean, so there's a lot of different options, and I don't think every parcel has to have the exact same approach. And so those will all be decisions we're trying to iron out this year.
Thank you.
I think that's the last slide on the public space concept.
Okay, great.
Is there other questions?
Oh, I just went through a lot.
Sorry.
Great, yeah, please.
There'll be some more green space. Switch. Here we go. So the street priorities, same kind of exercise we did with the public space framework. We have to sort of prioritize these different types of uses of the street. You can see trees, boulevards, green space was by far the thing that most people were excited about. That came in top in the public space framework conversations. It also came in the top during the street conversations. People were really interested in having a space that they can walk and roll safely and comfortably along the block. There's a lot of interest in biking through the area and then transit as well. So making sure we make those key goals that we had from the beginning are reflected through these. Rebecca mentioned this, but one of the big pieces of the project was figuring out what to do with the Nicollet Avenue ramp to the Midtown Greenway. So there's currently a ramp that comes down to the Midtown Greenway off of the west side of Nicollet. That ramp is not ADA compliant, it's too steep. It also creates a pinch point in the trail. You can see on the left there where the bridge pier is. That bridge pier, there's a wall right behind that photo. Behind us, if you're looking at that photo, that continues down the trail and really constricts that cross section to 13 feet for people walking and biking, which as much traffic as you get on the Greenway, it's not adequate. It's not enough space for people to safely move through that area. And so we asked folks in the first round of engagement, is this an issue? Is this something we should address? And put out some options for how to do that. And what we came up with, based on what people said, which was yes, fix the pinch point, yes, fix the ADA issue. And also we'd really love to see it better connected to the bikeway network. So today, Nicollet Avenue to the north and south of the site are not on the bikeway network. There's no bike facilities there today, and there's nothing planned in the city's transportation action plan. There are bikeways on First Avenue and on Blaisdell on either side of the site, highlighted in blue. There's a connection that comes down on Cecil Newman and 29 just to really get to that Nicollet Avenue ramp and have to curve around behind the site. It's pretty awkward. And so what our proposal is to actually move the ramp to First Avenue. First Avenue, if folks aren't aware, is getting reconstructed this year, and so they'll have a new two-way protected bikeway, very similar to the design that's on Bryant, south of Lake Street. So it'll be that kind of sidewalk level, two-way bikeway on the west side of the street, which will connect really well into a new ramp coming down into the Greenway. So that's part of the kind of puzzle here. It's getting that ramp figured out. You're going to address that pinch point in the ADA issue. So these are the 4 concepts that we brought out for public feedback last October. Similar to the public space framework, they had 3, we had 4 for this. The first design concept that we shared is a street that's open to all types of vehicles. It has wide green space and wide pedestrian spaces in reflection of those goals that we heard from people. Concept 2 and 3 are similar to concept 1 in that they're open to all types of vehicles. They have varying amounts of green space and pedestrian space. And in addition to what's in concept 1, it has a center median down the middle of the street. And the median would run the full block of the street. The purpose of that is to provide some traffic calming so that people driving on the street operate safely and come through that area in a safer and slower way. But you do lose a little bit of the green space, or you lose a little bit of pedestrian space in concept 2. I should say too, with concept 1 and concept 2, there is some limited parking or curbside uses that could be loading, unloading, those types of things mixed along the block. In concept 3, we took out all the parking, kept in that median, just to see if we could maximize that space for greening and that space for pedestrians, but still get that traffic calming effect with the median. And then concept 4 is a little different than the rest in that it was open only to transit and emergency vehicles. It would not be open to general purpose traffic coming through here. It has, again, wide green spaces, wide pedestrian. And what we heard when we put these out to the community, you can see in the survey that concept 1 and concept 4 were the top scoring ones. So that kind of first street and the street that's open to just transit. And then in our in-person rankings, fairly similar in that the concepts 2 and 3, which had the median, didn't get a lot of support. We saw more support for concept 1 and concept 4. So what we did with this, we basically said, well, you know, concept 2 and 3, they're not favored in the community, and they're not hitting those marks that we're trying to get, that wide green space, those wide pedestrian spaces. So let's focus in on 1 and 4 and really focus our analysis there and see how those two line up when we compare them under a technical lens and see how they would work out in the real world. So what we did to kind of analyze those two different options is we started by looking at what's going on in the neighborhood, right? There's a ton of things that have happened recently in this neighborhood. And there's a ton of things that are coming, a lot of street improvement projects in particular. Just to name a few, we've had the Whittier-Lindell Bikeway, which is that Bladesville Avenue Bikeway. That's a two-way on the west side of that street. Came in a couple of years ago. First Avenue, like I said, is having a new bikeway and some different, some new sidewalks and things to the east. A couple of years ago, there was a new exit added off of 35W that goes on to Lake Street that has changed traffic levels quite significantly in the area. There's been a lot more traffic because of that ramp or because of whatever, but it lines up pretty well when the ramp came in here. So I can't cause and effect, I can't really say, but I would guess they're very related. We've had a number of developments, which are the dots. So Carmel Mall was expanded recently. East Street Crossing is now open, so those are great amenities to have in the neighborhood. A couple on the horizon, we've got Simpson Housing is building out a new development just north of 26, and then immediately adjacent to the site, just south of there, is the Wells Fargo site at 3030 Nicollet. That one's supposed to break ground this year. It'll add back in that Wells Fargo branch that was burned down in 2020, and will also add about 110 units of family housing. So a lot of people coming in and out of that new building expected in the future. And then significantly and excitingly, there's a new transit project coming along Lake Street. If people haven't heard, the Route 21, which runs along Lake Street, will be upgraded to a bus rapid transit route, which will be called the B line. And with the B line will be various improvements, including some station improvements, but also 2 of the existing travel lanes on Lake Street will be converted to transit-only lanes, so they have that kind of red paint treatment, which will do a great amount of good work for getting transit through the area, but does change the way that traffic is expected to operate in the area. So that factors into some of our analysis. Yeah.
This is more about the bus lane and stuff like that, Lake Street. So as active person who actually takes 35 ramp and knows all that and busing in this neighborhood, I don't feel like people know whether or not to stop for a bus trying to merge from the right into oncoming traffic, or to just go completely around it and ignore it. And I'm wondering, like, with this new bus lane, if it would be like a blast from the city that kind of informs people how to interact in a vehicle when there's a bus trying to merge onto that.
On Lake Street.
Yeah.
Merge into the bus only.
Yeah, so like when the bus comes on, like no, without the bus lane, you guys right. When they pull off and pick up people and then kind of merge back on, like without the signaling light. That light thing.
Yeah.
If they know how to like whether wait and let it merge or to continue going when they let it through and just continue to cut off that bus.
Yeah.
Waiting.
You're supposed to let the bus merge. You're supposed to yield to the bus. It has it on the back of the bus, kind of lights up, and that little light. You know, there's a lot going on the buses. Usually there's ads, there's all kinds of things. But that is generally the way that it's supposed to operate. With the B line changes, it'll actually be a little more simple for folks because it'll be red and the bus will be operating in that lane. There will be times when to turn right, you have to get into the bus lane. So you'll merge into the bus lane again, yielding to the bus. I know that it's a fairly big safety concern when the bus is stopped at a stop, let's say, and someone turns right in front of it, because what if they pull out the wrong moment, right, and they don't see you coming? So there's, you know, a lot of considerations with buses starting and stopping. It's certainly something that, you know, I know Metro Transit puts out a lot of communication on. It's not something the city does as much because it's more of a Metro Transit interaction. hopefully get a little more clear with some dedicated space for buses. Another thing we looked at when we were comparing concept 1 and concept 4 again is looking at the way that traffic would operate around the site with concept 1 and with concept 4. So with concept 1, the new Nicollet Avenue is open to all types of vehicles, so that's an option for folks. With concept 4, if it's only if Nicollet Avenue is only open for people, transit buses, and emergency vehicles, everyone else has to continue driving around the site like they do today. So this isn't anything new. But the big difference that we're finding with our design, and this is First Avenue, kind of running along the bottom of the screen, so north is to the right here, is that we have that new greenway ramp, right? It's coming on the First. So we expect there's going to be a lot more people walking and biking on First Avenue. We have that new two-way protected bikeway on the west side of First. Today, there's a one-way northbound bikeway on the east side. And so what's happening in the new condition where we have the ramp, we have the two-way bikeway on the west side, is that we now have a lot of people biking and walking that's crossing directly with traffic across Cecil Newman Lane. So you can see where that red arrow is, all of that traffic that's riding around the site today, which includes a lot of vehicles and a lot of trucks. Nicollet Avenue is a truck route, and so there's lots of trucks serving restaurants, doing those types of deliveries. All those vehicles have to turn across that two-way bikeway and that sidewalk connection at Cecil Newman and First. And so that's a condition we generally try to avoid. If we have concept 1, where we don't have to route those big trucks, in particular around the site, we can create a much smaller cross section, make this a safer condition for people making that crossing. With concept 4, we're limited in what we can do. So we talked a little bit about the context of what's going on in the neighborhood, all the new stuff that has happened and is coming. We use that to create basically a large traffic analysis for the area. We did a couple things to make some assumptions about how we model traffic in the area. One of those is that first of all, we used 2023 vehicle counts. And so we collected new data about how many vehicles are in the area in 2023, so just last year. We have some pretty great but kind of somewhat lofty goals, I think, at the city to really reduce trips across the city to meet some climate goals, which is something we absolutely should be doing. So we assumed that we would see reductions in trips based on those goals to shift more people towards walking, biking, taking transit. So we assume that in our analysis that would be the case, and that we see 2023 trips decline because we have more transit services coming through here. We have better walking and biking facilities. We expect more people to be using those, less people to drive. We did assume that there would be some new trips coming to the new development, the new Nicollet redevelopment. There's going to be housing, like Rebecca said, there's going to be commercial, there's going to be lots of things for people to come to. So we expect there's going to be some more people coming to the development. In an urban area like this, we assumed that a third of those trips would come by vehicle, so less than half, a third of them would come by vehicle, and 2/3 would come by walking, biking, or taking transit. It's pretty, it has those amenities. We're improving those amenities today and into the future, so we're hoping that people really are coming by those different means, and so we assume that in our model as well. And we use the analysis to compare concept 1, where the street's open to all types of vehicles, and concept 4, where the street's only open to emergency vehicles and transit. And what we found with that analysis is that for concept 4, we actually have a really hard time getting transit buses to the new Nicollet Avenue. What happens because that new B-line conversion is coming on Lake Street, is we have less space to store cars to get around the site. And so they start stacking up on that. You can see where that red arrow is. We have headed eastbound between Nicollet and First Avenue. More vehicles start to stack up in there waiting to get around the site because they can't use Nicollet. And they start to stack up down Nicollet Avenue. So down south where the 3030 development is, where we are trying to get transit through efficiently. So what that does is it actually delays transit. We see anywhere from a 3-minute to a 10-minute delay for transit to get to the new Nicollet Avenue. So we're actually seeing that concept 4, even though the intent of having transit on the street is really to support fast and reliable transit, that because of the conditions, because of needing to get so much traffic around the site, that we're actually delaying buses by creating a one block transit only. That's a lot of analysis, but there's questions we can certainly look back on it. The other thing that we looked at was trying to understand in light of our climate goals, what does concept 1, how does that compare with concept 4? Part of the argument for concept 4 is that it's more climate friendly because we have fewer places for cars to drive. And so concept 4 should support that climate goal better than concept 1. But if you think about the way the site is designed and the street network is designed today, there's a lot of one-ways around the site. So Lake Street, of course, is a two-way, but everything else is a one-way. First Down is a one-way northbound, Cecil Newman is a one-way westbound, 29th is a one-way westbound, and Blaisdell is a one-way southbound. So if you're trying to, if the street isn't open to everyone and you're trying to access an access point on First, for instance, and you're coming from the north, you have to drive 3/4 of the way around the site in order to reach that access point. Same if you're coming from the south, you have to drive, let's say Nicollet or First, Cecil Newman to 29th to Blaisdell if you're trying to get around the site. And so it really creates these kind of longer trips rather than these shorter trips. One big part of our climate goals is reducing what we call vehicle miles traveled. So making shorter trips, making fewer trips, overall seeing less miles, which adds to greenhouse gases, those types of things. And so what we're doing by not allowing the street to open is actually adding some more circuitous routes for people. That's not going to move us towards that climate goal. So that's what we're finding with that one, just on a very high level. I think it's a very, it's a block in a small area, so this is not going to make or break it either way. Like, this is a pretty minor thing, I think, compared to the other piece of analysis, but just to kind of call out that it does create some longer trips for people coming around the site if the Nicollet Avenue is not open to all types of vehicles. So what we're recommending is something that's similar to concept 1, where the street would be open to transit, people driving all types of vehicles, and emergency vehicles as well. It does have, again, wide green spaces. We're able to fit in pretty great green spaces. There's a lot of wide sidewalks that allow space for future sidewalk cafes, if there's restaurants or businesses alongside of them that will use them. There's also an opportunity to do some limited parking along the block, and we'll pull up what that looks like here in a second. Those parking spots are meant to comply with new ADA guidance coming out of the federal government called PROAG. And so those parking spots would actually be spots that someone who uses a wheelchair could drive, park their vehicle, deploy their wheelchair, and roll up to the sidewalk without having to get into the street. So they'd be at sidewalk level, so much easier for people to use those if they are using a wheelchair. And so what the street overall would look like, this is a graphic that has north on the right. So it's a little bit flipped. Lake Street, you can see where all the red is. They're on the south. Those red lines going kind of up and down on the page are the Lake Street transit lanes that would be out at the B line. And then as part of the Nicollet project, we're proposing to add a short section of transit lane in the northbound direction. Again, that's where we saw the delay in the model and the traffic analysis. So this would help transit get to and through Lake Street so they can pick up passengers on the southeast corner of the site and then continue on their way. One big piece here to be aware of is that mid-block crossing that the public space framework team was working on. With a mid-block crossing like this, we like to see only a lane of traffic in either direction. If there's 2 lanes of traffic, it encourages what we call a double threat scenario, where let's say one car stops as you're just starting to cross, the other car doesn't. They can't see you because you're behind the first car. So we like to avoid that, which is why we had the transit lane merging back into the single vehicle lane ahead of that. So you have the chance to cross 1 lane of traffic. There's a median, there'd be a RFB, like a flasher like there is on Lindale, as you're crossing that to help get across, and then you could cross the other side, the other lane safely. We've got the kind of parking bays limited along the block. I think there's 3 different parking bays, and then a lot of wide green spaces. So that green space would be intended to treat stormwater. So we'd be actively collecting stormwater and treating that before it gets returned into the water system. As you get across the Greenway Bridge, we're also proposing to make some changes at Cecil Newman Lane and Nicollet. A key piece of that is that today, 29th and Cecil Newman Lane kind of enter into Nicollet at different angles, at different spots. And so it's I think it's pretty confusing for people using it, whether they're walking, biking, and driving. And so what we're doing with the design is actually teeing those things up a little bit more. We're bringing 29th up so that it's more of a logical way to get onto that street. And make a little bit more sense for people using those different modes. We're also proposing to put a new traffic signal there, so it'll make it easier for people, especially walking and biking, to get across Nicollet. We're looking at making a raised protected bikeway on Cecil Newman Lane that will connect you back into First, where that great connection to the Greenway is going to be, and so you can get to that Greenway connection. There is a bikeway on Cecil Newman today, so this would just be upgrading that and adding a lot more green space.
Got a comment online from Peter, that's for the last slide, says whether or not the final approach is significant depends on how far away the trip starts. A person is unlikely to pull out of a parking lot at Lake and First, then to drive to Blaisdell.
It's the one where you're doing this one.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, say it again. Someone's
Whether or not the final approach is significant depends on how far away the trip started. A person is unlikely to pull out of a parking spot on Lake and First and then drive to Lake.
oh yeah, right. Yeah, this is only a small section of the overall trip that people are making, just to kind of call out the differences in this immediate area.
Going to the current slide that you were just on, I'm curious, have you guys explored or talked with the Railroad Authority about access the Greenway of the South? And I know we've had this even with the Sewer Line Garden in general, but I do know that Nicollet is known as a transit hub in the future. Even today it is, but in the future it will be even more if they were to ever add light rail or a streetcar down there. Then they would have great access on that south side, connecting to the park space or to the flat, and those are conversations about that.
Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations with them about that. I think overall, our team's desire would love to see a connection from the site side into the Greenway. So far, what the Railroad Authority has told us is that, yes, there would be an access point if there were transit in the Greenway. They would like to see something that's similar to the West Bank Station, where there is a vertical circulation, stairs, elevator that comes off the bridge. So you don't have to cross the tracks, you just enter onto the platform from the Nicollet Bridge. So that's their ideal vision. They don't want people, let's say if it is a light rail or streetcar or something in the trench, they are hesitant to design something that allows people to walk across those things. I think we've caught out some inconsistencies in their approach. There's obviously the green crescent just to the east of here where you can do that, and they allowed that quite recently. So,
But the decision was made that you cannot touch that area.
Yeah, we are trying to, I mean, we haven't made any big decisions at this point as it relates to what will be abutting. Well, we have the park, I guess I should say that, on the east side. We don't really have any decisions made on like what the building will look like on the west side that'll abut the Greenway. But we want to be able to allow for various types of futures. So like maybe one future is there is some kind of transit in the Greenway and you aren't able to walk across, and so there isn't going to be a pet access dam. But maybe there's a future where you can. So we want to be able to try and have development for that doesn't preclude the ability to like incorporate changes in the future that would allow for access.
Yeah, I just gotta say, it would have been really sweet to see that whole park space ramp down in general, so then you can get direct easy access without going on the ramp to get down there. But
Yeah.
again, or terrace, but either way, that's definitely something the railroad
Yeah.
owns that.
Yeah, and one other challenge, we might have talked about this last time, is this area that's just like south of the existing trail is recessed by about 15 feet. So there's actually a big grade difference between the bottom of the trench and where the trail is. And to have, for instance, streetcar or light rail, they need the height from the bridge to the bottom of the 15 different foot trench. And so we talked about filling it in. You couldn't fill it in if you're gonna have transit there in the future. So that's something that the Railroad Authority has balked at. Not to say, I think our goal with Rebecca's point is not to preclude something, you know, that those plans for transit in the trench could change in the future. And we could be ready for that.
And it might be 20 years and then
Yeah.
maybe there'll be, a whole new approach.
Yeah, I was just curious if there was, that makes total sense, kind of what I expected, but I just wanted to kind of make sure. for that was covering something.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something the Lindale neighborhood asked about too. They were interested in writing a
Everybody.
letter to the.
Yeah, and our colleague that has been leading the public space, she's, a designer. I know she had some amazing.
I think it's terrace near that.
I was like, that would be amazing, except we can't do it. So, we'll see. Our grandchildren can do it.
Yeah, so we covered this. That's basically all the major design elements shown on this layout. So
Has the city ever thought about acquiring those other parcels, next to the greenway? to
Yes.
Make a wider arc that tears it down and where's that?
So we went through a very lengthy analysis of trying to do that. So we did get appraisals done, for all these 4 properties that are here. They're all owned by the same person. And then there's 4 properties here owned by the family that owns the restaurant, Hotel Bay. And then this is a different ownership, the laundromat, vacant laundromat. And so we did make an offer to the Hotel Bay family, and they wanted a lot more, so we didn't really go anywhere with that. And then we've never actually talked figures, any kind of actual numbers with Mr. Jablonski, who won't give us a number, and so we're like, well, we don't know, yeah. So, and then we also went through a lot of this analysis about like, what would the park, how would, just like how it would all function, and potentially vacating 29th or vacating Cecil Newman or making them 2-way or, like combining, various sites and moving it. And like, we went through a lot of analysis. And at the end of the day, for a variety of reasons, we landed on, let's focus on our 10 acres we've got. Let's try to figure out our 10 acres. Once we have that development, sort of on a path, let's see where the market is. We'll see where these property owners are, see if any, if they've come to some deals with somebody else to do something there. But we're not pursuing additional parkland. So the city of Minneapolis also is an important little note. The city of Minneapolis cannot own park space or park land as a municipal agency. We can only own parkland under our arm called the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Group. And so we have been working closely with the Park and Rec Board for the big highlighted yellow area on that front. And if we were to ever do something in the future, we would have to have them on, on board from the very start to be able to like add additional. This is going to be probably over the amount that would be required for the park dedication area for this 10 acres. And so with the developments themselves wouldn't be required to build new. So I think we're just, we're kind of waiting.
a lot of options, yeah.
We're just looking at a lot of options.
So Minneapolis Park Board will own and maintain this future park space. What about the other little park spaces?
Those will all have to be privately owned. And then we would just we would record something against the property that would require them to maintain it. Probably as publicly accessible. With certain.
So the Minneapolis Park Board can't own smaller parcels?
No, they can, they just don't want.
Okay. It's more maintenance.
Yeah, it's just harder for them and that was one reason why concept A that had there was several reasons why that one was not favored by staff either at the end of the day, but they didn't want to have street bisecting their park. They do have examples of that. But it also can become, so it's kind of a headache for them when it comes to maintenance, but it's also can be a safety thing if you've got kids running across from one place to the other, or just general jaywalkers thinking they can, not walk half a block down to the mid-block crossing. And that one also felt a lot more private and less public. So it felt like it was more insular to the project site and may not feel as welcoming to anybody in the community that wants to walk there, go there, or bike there. And it didn't have as many eyes. So you wouldn't have as much like retail nearby it with eyes on the street. which really end up as pretty important. With having businesses with, residents and customers, or, employees and customers going in and out. And so it felt like we were gonna have a more publicly accessible and safe park with this. The city will continue to hold it until they're ready to.
Do others have questions? Comments?
It does not, so, by the looks of this, it looks like it's only like, like for, maybe like, what is the parking space there that, it really doesn't look like it's the time, so, but it would be received back if it would be.
Yeah, so, let's see, if the 88 spots are these wider ones. You can kind of see there's a jut out, so that's a spot. So each of these have 3 to 5 spots in the phase.
Okay.
So the 88 spots, there's one per side of the block, and that's for that new guidance as well. It wouldn't be every space designed like that, and the extra width is to allow that ramp to be deployed from the.
Will those have like the,
Yeah, yep, they'll have a sign, it'll either be, it hasn't been determined yet whether there'll be parking or whether there'll be transfer zones, so there's both options.
Is a parking on these sites included in general? Is that part of the parcels? Like if the city owns part of it, like the parking ramp, if you're asking people to come here, if they're gonna want to park, or are we not? Is that something that you guys are looking at and including in there as part of the recommendations of selling these properties to developers? Again, points, who's that?
Yeah, I don't think that the city is gonna put any money into parking. Because we have a track record of the last 10 to 20 years where we are divesting of parking structures. We divest of a lot about 10 years ago, and then we don't put any money. So these will be, I think there's like 7, maybe 8 stalls on this one block. And so those would be public, right? We own the revenue. And if they're metered, then that revenue would go to parking fund, just like a meter in one city. If they're loading only and we don't meter them, because like right now, Nicollet doesn't have. So we may not meter them either. And then you could, and then it'd be follow all the same rules. Like if there's a business who wants a 15-minute sign, they apply for that and they pay for that. That's almost fine. So we could, follow those same rules. We're gonna have to have some parking. And you can't, for our zoning code, you can't have like a parking lot fronting any of our streets. So it either needs to be like inside, like in the middle of a block with an actual building with residences or businesses lining it, or it needs to be underground. And so I'm really hopeful that we can have shared parking between those. Because if we have, if you have a this is where not having a master developer gets harder and harder, and why it's so much more challenging to not, is because then you start to have lots of negotiations about exactly how the agreement's gonna go, who's gonna pay for what, who's gonna own what, who's gonna manage what, who's gonna collect the revenue for what, how is it gonna get spent, so who's gonna do the budgets every year, and so it's a lot of legal work, but I am hopeful that we can get.
You guys could do it.
I do have a question about the parcel that was probably but is there like any ramifications, like how much is common, how much is retail, like what sort of conversations?
Yeah, so we do have what I love to show people. So if you go to our website, there's, it's not the easiest thing to find, but if you go to expectations, project expectations, we have a document that spells out like the 15 or a dozen or so policies that are already adopted city policy that we are going to apply to the site just like we would anywhere. And so, that ranges from the minimum 4 stories. We could, as a property owner, require a minimum of 5, or we could require a minimum of 6. We could just keep it at 4. And then along those same lines, there's somewhat complicated calculation for how the first floor must be tenanted essentially on Lake Street and on Lake Street and so the new comprehensive plan, I usually don't go into this much detail, but I think the question and your ability to understand it is going to work. So there's a distinction between active retail and then just commercial. And there's a there's like a various percentage calculation based on different square footage if you're in a PUD, which is a planned unit development, versus if you're just in your own little building. So it's going to be challenging for us to really iron all of that out in RFPs. But we're going to do our best, and I think it's pretty safe to just say that the frontage on Lake and Nicollet is going to be some kind of. So some of it will be required to be active. So like we won't be able to put a dentist office is not active. So you couldn't have all offices, or you couldn't have all tax services. Like you'd have to have some amount as essentially a restaurant, grocery store. Typically, it's going to be like businesses that are open later than 5 p.m. on a very regular basis and have higher customer counts. So like more people going in and out. So, you know, dentist office, you don't have that many clients in a day, depending, but my dentist office is right on Lake Street. Just fine. We have meeting appointments and early morning. So, oh, probably, I know, I'm always usually in there and I'm seeing my neighbors. So, yeah, so it's gonna, but yeah, there will be a mix of active and just regular commercial. And then I think fronting the Greenway will probably just be residential on the first floor, and fronting First and Rosedale, I think will see the first floor. It might take some additional work with my planning colleagues as they, but you know, part of phase 3 is doing a first floor commercial retail analysis and how financially feasible is it. And we're going to be trying to do some work around requiring some sizing in our RFPs as well, so that you don't see a developer just create one massive 5,000 square foot space that nobody in their right mind can lease and then. So we're also hoping to have some guidelines around, you should size at least some portion of your spaces at 1,000 square feet, or maybe even at 750 square feet, I don't know, or like, and how to sort of proportion that for success so that we don't end up with first floor vacancies. Like, that's my nightmare. I don't want first floor vacancies in my mixed use building. It's like,
Driving area.
yeah.
Going back to the park space, is there a pavilion that's included in this? And will that have some sort of like restaurant food feature that then that would allow?
Good question.
Similar to,
Probably not, no. I mean, I think that we want to really try to focus our retail opportunities in their actual.
Sure.
So I don't think they're planning any buildings. There might be like some smaller, like mechanical area where they like store.
About like
Their
public
tools and
restrooms.
things. Well, for public restrooms, they are hoping to lease space from a future property owner. Somewhere in a building that is along here. And now we don't really know if it'll be at this corner or at this corner, but they would then staff that with with park board staff members, and then you could like, you know, be a kid and go get a basketball or whatever, right? And then they would have public restrooms in that during their open house. It's like our regular like Whittier park here. So we are really hoping. You know, there's some really great ideas that are super cool indoor public park space that we have floated with them and that they're interested in, but you know, a lot of it will come down to the park board starting their own planning process and their own engagement process and their own budgeting process about just how much are they going to have available and are they going to budget for the development of the park and for, you know, the possibility of future leasing. You could condo it out and they could buy too, like that's always an option. But the park board would have to make that choice and then they would have to bring it. we'll be likely transferring this for $1 to them. And then they would, build the park and operate the park. But if they were to actually buy an interior space that has market rates. Probably.
What if they can't afford to develop all that? And then do all of it, or have you guys?
No, the park board is on board. And the one reason why it really works here is because in their big, like, Southwest Park Master Plan, they have like these various diagrams and circles of where they're missing amenities in their park system. And we just happen to hit an open space that isn't within their park shed walking distances for their other parks. So it was already in their plans to invest in parks.
Got a question online. Have you involved any developers on what would work economically for them? Those are huge blocks that need to be developed and may need more very imaginative things that could really affect how things are laid out.
Yes, and so that's what phase 3 during 2024 is all about. And part of that will be focus groups with developers as part of the community engagement and a wide range of developers. So both the big developers in town, as well as we have a lot of connections at CPED and where I work with ULI, who has an emerging developer program, and LISC, Twin Cities, who has an emerging developer program, and we work with a lot of them with some of our loan products. So we'll be able to really try and get a broad spectrum of developers. And it won't only be folks contributing to those conversations that are sort of the ones you usually see doing things, big development. But yes, those are all very critical. And so we're hoping to be able to answer as much of those as we can over the course of the next year. But yeah, very important question.
Was that the last slide of your presentation?
I think there's like a conclusion slide. But yeah, kind of the next steps for this phase of the process before phase 3 kicks off, what Rebecca was talking about, is that we will look to bring the new Nicollet Avenue concept layout that we just looked at in the public space framework to the city council and the mayor for their approval here in the next month or two. And then assuming that all goes well, we'll continue on to phase 3 and start designing the streets we can build it.
Is there any other last comments, questions?
This is our website, email, if anyone wants to go find more information or send us comments.
And just a quick note for the website, at the very bottom on like a green button at the bottom. So if you want to receive our project updates, we do like an email blast, like in advance of open houses, or when we share lots of new information on the website, or like before we go to council, when we're on an agenda, we'll send out. So not lots and lots of emails, but it's a good way to just stay abreast of like the key milestones.
2 questions online. Is there no similar bird's eye view slide of concept 4? And the second question is, I may have missed it earlier, but is there a transit station?
Yeah, so we don't have a concept layout fully fleshed out for concept 4, just enough analysis to compare the different options. It takes a lot of time to do the concept layout that we did, so there's not one for concept 4. And then yes, there is a transit station, so you can see the new red T's. Those would be for the Route 18. So the Route 18 currently routes around the site on Blaisdell and on First, and so that would be coming down Nicollet. There'd be a southbound stop on the corner just past Lake on Nicollet, and then just north of Lake on Nicollet for the northbound stop.
And there is a beeline stop. You can, if you're at the site, you can see where it's sort of like stubbed in. I don't know what the real word is, but it's covered in like the colorful Metro Transit wrap. And that is right about there. That's the beeline stop.
So this is westbound stop is here, and then the eastbound stop is here. So it'd be a really nice place to connect from the beeline to the Route 18 and vice versa. And then in the future, we've also been working with Metro Transit on upgrading the Route 18 into a future bus rapid transit line. They identified it, as an upcoming priority, and so they should put a year on it pretty soon. We'll be able to start planning for that.
And then don't forget, we have the huge new Met Transit station right there at 35W.
Thank you guys. We appreciate your time. Thank you for
Yeah.
coming in and presenting. This was really great. Very informative. We got asked a lot of questions. I feel like I asked a lot, so really great. Thank you. Stop recording.
No.
All right. Well, I think this is like the end of our meeting. I think